Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 22nd of November 2024. And let's go straight to where we normally start. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. And you can find them in the description to the video below. So 1,050 personnel lost is much lower than we've seen. So we've seen it over 1,600. It dropped to 1,500 odd yesterday, which is still insanely high. And then there's a 500 personnel drop to today. So I wonder whether weather is playing a part. When there are cloudy skies, when there is rain or snow or this and that, activity does calm down, especially if drones are not so useful. So that is, clouds in the sky can stop reconnaissance drones going out, FPV drones operating as effectively. If you've got fog, cloud, rain, all this kind of stuff, it will affect what you are doing on the front lines, or indeed not doing. And that is, 1,050 personnel loss. So still incredibly high. Tim White was talking about this morning, saying, hey, you know, this is really a lot lower than we have seen, but my goodness, it's still over 1,000, which previously was like record-breaking days. One tank, so again, similar rationale there, and 13 armoured personnel vehicles and 5 pieces of artillery. So all much, much lower than we have seen. One multiple launch rocket system, one anti-aircraft warfare system, so fairly good to see them listed. 32 vehicles and fuel tanks, vastly lower than we've seen. Yesterday, I think it was 95, 97, something like that. So a third of what we saw yesterday, and one piece of special equipment. It's still going to hurt the Russians, especially that personnel loss there, but generally a much quieter day, statistically speaking. Now we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list. He's come back with 2, one for 2 days ago, one for yesterday. The one 2 days ago had 91 personnel loss. That's still a pretty high number there, although we have seen the odd day of over 200 that he's caught on camera. So if we look at the overall list, we can see that it's about a 3-to-1 loss ratio, maybe a tad more than that. In terms of combat asset losses, it is pretty much equal there, give or take. So most of that difference in the overall figures is coming from trucks, ATVs, and civilian vehicles. You can see that constitutes a really large number of the Russian losses there. So let's look at the Ukrainian losses first. We have a boat, a couple of bits of artillery, 3 tanks, nothing too extravagant there in a tank category, and then 3 infantry fighting vehicles, 2 Bradleys destroyed, 1 Bradley damaged. Shows that Bradleys are featuring quite a lot, Western equipment featuring quite a lot. I was reading yesterday that there are a number of Bradleys seen in, was it Poland? I get a feeling that they are consistently maybe still getting Bradleys that are resulting from previous deliveries, pledges. Because I have been wondering about this. They have been going through the Bradleys a fair amount. They are particularly useful vehicles. It would be great to see further deliveries of those pledged from the US. We have usual APCs on the list here. Senator, M113 Senator. Interesting that a backed UMG, talking about it yesterday in terms of that's an MRAP or an APC listed here. Depends how it's configured, but that's the base vehicle to the FFG MRAP that are going to be coming from the US, and I presume that was a US provided one there listed on this list, but it could well be a German one as well, who knows, because I think they have had some back UMGs or the ones from Germany that weren't done to MRAP standards, mine resistant ambush protection, so they obviously get different configuration, different armor and whatnot that makes them more resistant to mines. In the MRAP list, we have many more vehicles there than in the APC, only 5 APCs lost or damaged. MRAPs, most of them destroyed or abandoned, which is a bit of a worry. Most of them Cossacks or Cossack 7s of the sort of 9, I think, that are on the list there. So the Ukrainians use a lot more MRAPs, as I've discussed before, than the Russians. If we look at the Russian list, far longer list, but no MRAPs on there at all. They generally don't really have so many, don't use so many. Thank you so much, Ivan. It's very kind. A cup of tea, amazing. And I'm so thirsty as well. It's incredible. So we have artillery systems lost here, a TOS-1A thermobaric system damaged. We've got a captured Jetsint B. Interesting. It's not often you get captured howitzers, and I guess that will be a result of activity in the Kursk region. But maybe not. It could come from that southeastern region around Karakova, down south of there in that pocket where there's intense fighting. And I guess if you've got a damaged howitzer that you can't move so easily, you might just give that up to the other side. I don't know what the context is of that though. Okay, moving on to tanks. We've got about 10 tanks here, including a destroyed T-90M. That's probably the one I showed in a video yesterday. We have a track garden shed. We've got a garbage part, another T-62M garbage part. I presume that's throwing lots of stuff on top of it, either disguising it or trying to get cope cage settings on top that can make it look like, an interesting vehicle. Looking at what's destroying these, we've got vampire drones featuring quite a lot, night vision drones, abandoned and hit by FPVs and vampire drones. These vampire drones, or Baba Yagas, or whatever you want to call them, hexacopters. And then you got octocopters. These larger drones are being used more frequently. Punisher drone there, vampire, so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay, moving on to infantry fighting vehicles. Only 5 today compared to previous days where we've had insane numbers. Most of these destroyed or abandoned. 4 out of the 5. BMP-1s, 2s, BTR. Then we have got some general AFVs and armoured personnel carriers as well. About 7 armoured personnel carriers. Usual culprits. Trucks, ATVs and civilian vehicles featuring very heavily. ATVs, a lot of Desert Cross 1000-3 quads and buggies lost on a daily basis at the moment. And then usual kind of pickups, loads, cars and motorcycles. A lot of unarmoured civilian vehicles used on the front line at the moment. And then when we come to yesterday's losses, we can see it's about a probably 4-1. What do we have? Yeah, probably 4-1. At least a 4-1, maybe going up to 5-1. Combat asset losses, probably a 2-1 Russian to Ukrainian. So again, most of the vehicles being lost on this list are again civilian vehicles and trucks. And I think this probably reflects that civilian vehicles are being used more and more in frontline assaults and delivering troops to contact zones. Okay, going to the Ukrainian losses. Hopefully the quality of this is still good enough to look at in zoomed in. So we have a Ukrainian excavator, M777, the howitzer damaged, a couple of other howitzers, 3 tanks, all T-72s, 2 out of 3 of them destroyed. Infantry fighting vehicle, another destroyed Bradley. The other 2, though, are BMP and BTR. APCs, M113, destroyed, abandoned. And then we have a VAB, a French-provided APC, destroyed as well. But not too much on there. AFV, the identity is, this is a weird vehicle. Doesn't know what it is. That's great. I love some of the entries Andrew has. And a single MRAP there. So really not as much as we've seen on previous days. The Russians losing a fair amount of combat assets here. Artillery, 2 BM-21 Grads, multiple launch rocket systems, 1 abandoned, then hit by an FPV drone, and then another one damaged by an FPV drone. 4 tanks. General array there. Infantry fighting vehicles, a dozen of these on the list, most of them destroyed and abandoned. Usual culprits in there, APCs, MTLBs mainly, there's 4 of those, and 2 MRAPs, mainly destroyed or abandoned. And then it's on to a fairly long list of civilian vehicles, ATVs, quad bikes mainly, or quads, and trucks as well. So yeah, fairly heavy losses for the Russians there. Nothing crazy valuable on either side. A couple of multiple launch rocket systems, a bit problematic for the Russians there, but generally losing just this a large number of bits of kit on a daily basis. As for personnel, tracked there, 121 for yesterday, as according to Andrew Perpetua. Right, moving on. A senior North Korean general was reportedly injured in Ukraine's most recent missile strikes in the Kursk region. So that, if you remember, the Storm Shadow strikes in Kursk, taking out that potentially what was thought to be a command and control bunker all set up. And there were rumours that North Koreans were there as well. And there is now the claim that a senior North Korean officer was injured in that strike. Marks the first reported case of a high-ranking DPRK military figure being wounded in the war, according to the Wall Street Journal. Tea break, very, very needed. Okay, we also have another, I'm not going to play this because it's fairly explicit, but there's a number of Wagnerites have died again in Mali, so they're having a bit of a bloody nose there on a fairly consistent basis. I presume this is as a result of Tuareg rebels in the province of Mopti. The Wagnerites were ambushed on the Bandia Garoy Jigibombo road. I just wanted to say that. And this is an issue for the Russians in Mali. They seem to be losing a few troops there in a number of fairly large ambushes. I don't think this was as large as previous ones we've seen, but it still shows that they're having a bit of a rough time over there, which is connected to Ukraine in many ways, i.e., first of all, funding of the war. That's why Russia is trying to gain as much influence in the Sahel region of Africa as they can, and pretty much anywhere around the world. It's about soft influence, hard influence, and that translating also into natural resources or money coming back to Russia, and then that underwrites the war project in Ukraine. Moving on. In terms of missiles overnight, I don't have an infographic of missiles sent into Ukraine. I don't know whether that means there were none, no Shahid drones, no missiles. There has been an explosion in Dnipro city. I think this might have been this morning. So Dnipro was where the RS-26, that intercontinental ballistic missile, if it was, whatever it was, that struck Dnipro yesterday. Today, scare quotes, just an Iskander ballistic missile hitting Dnipro this morning. Yesterday, there were some strikes. Kryvyi Rih was particularly hit. Again, that's been targeted a number of times. Number of wounded in that strike yesterday has amounted to 32, including 2 children. 12 remain in hospital, and the condition of two of the people is described as serious. So Kryvyi Rih really taking a bit of a knocking there, and that that doesn't bode well for any city relatively close to the front line. This is kind of northish of Kherson, but it's here. Zaporizhia, the city of, and Dnipropetrovsk, the city of, seem to be close enough to get some horrible attention from all ranges of missiles and ordnance in a way that other places much further from the front line don't. And as a result, these places really are on the forefront of attacks at the moment. Another place is Sumy, so north of Ukraine, just over the border from Russia. Awful scenes from Sumy, says Tim White, where there appears to have been what we may call a double war crime. Not only has Russia's kamikaze drones attacked civilians in their homes, but Governor Volodymyr Artyuk has said that explosives were also filled with shrapnel to maximize casualties. Russia's killed 2 people in Sumy. Rescuers spent hours trying to rescue trapped residents. They managed to free 2 victims from a house destroyed by Russian drones. 12 people were injured, as well as the 2 who died. And really horrible scenes there from Sumy. Kyiv Independent reports on this. Shahid drones hit Sumy equipped with shrapnel munitions, according to the regional governor, who said this is pure genocide. Stuff like this, we must remind people when they're worrying about whether, and I had a bit of a rant on Facebook this morning saying, look, Ukraine firing ATACMS into Russia is not escalation. Ukraine firing Storm Shadows into Russia is not escalation. Russia have sent 14,000 missiles since the beginning of the war into Ukraine. The length and breadth of all of Ukraine, east to west, north to south. Every city has been struck. Russia has used missiles from North Korea and Iran and drones from Iran. Russia's missiles are jam-packed full of Western components. 14,000 missiles against, say, 20 sent into Kursk over the last few days, and Russia calls that escalation. It's exactly the same. It's not escalation. It's retaliation for what Russia has done. That's not escalation. So don't get sucked into this rhetoric that actually is being repeated now by a lot of mainstream media outlets that, as we've seen over the course of the war, they have a tendency to repeat, kind of not on purpose, but just get sucked into using the language of the Russian narrative. And it's deeply frustrating because then that permeates into the public who then read it in that way. So we need to put correctives on what is being claimed. We need to insert ourselves into discussions about the Ukraine war to make sure that Ukraine is getting represented fairly. So this is not escalation. But also we need to remind those same people that, oh, by the way, Ukraine, when they send rockets, missiles into Russia, they are targeting military establishments and military objectives. When Russia do it into Ukraine, yes, there are some times when they are going for military targets, but many times they appear to be going for civilian targets and energy infrastructure and so on and so forth. This is about crippling the Ukrainian civilian society so that they no longer have the appetite for their defensive war. We must remind these people that it's not Ukraine using shrapnel munitions and firing them into a civilian area. That is genocide. That is terrorism. That is what Russia does on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And it's absolutely inexcusable. And we must remind people of that. Okay. Discussion over. Ukraine have apparently struck somewhere in Krasnodar. It was very... it almost looks beautiful if it wasn't destruction. So something in Krasnodar region has been burning. Reports say at least one site in the city's outskirts is heavily burning. Various pictures emanating from there. Not really sure what was struck. Local channels report that something's burning near Yablonovsky Bridge. But quite what was hit in Krasnodar, I don't know yet. And according to Dossier Sviona, a Storm Shadow missile strike hit a command post in Marino. This is what I was saying previously, Kursk region, on November the 20th. 18 soldiers were killed, 33 injured, including 3 North Koreans. Lieutenant General Solodchuk was reportedly present. Later, an explosion injured 13 more soldiers from the 88th Sapper Regiment. It'd be fascinating to know really what was destroyed by those storm shadows. According to the Wall Street Journal, as mentioned already, a senior North Korean general was wounded in a recent missile strike in the area. So there is that. Due to an increased threat of missile attack, today's Verkhovna Rada meeting has been cancelled. So there were rumours yesterday that Russia was going to be targeting the Ukrainian parliament today. The Rada Services Committee Secretariats are also not working, and the number of people in the office of the Prosecutor General and other state bodies has been minimised. Okay, on to, I hope they don't go for that. I've been wondering about that since the beginning of the war. Like, why did Russia not go for some of these incredibly important cultural, not so much cultural, but that as well, political places, like the site of the parliament, the site of the president's kind of residence and whatnot, and what's holding them back from doing that? Answers on a postcard. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Russia claims it notified the US via the nuclear risk reduction hotline 30 minutes before launching the Oreshnik missile, the Kremlin spokesman Peskov told TASS. There's been claim and counterclaim concerning whether Russia did alert the West or the US concerning the use of this ICBM or IRBM, whatever it is. Still people arguing to toss over that. And arguing as to whether there were any warnings or not. We're going to come to that a little bit later, so let's just get rid of that now. Okay, Russia's weekend missile strikes hit 3 of the 5 working thermal plants owned by Ukrainian power grid giant DTEK, so this was last weekend. One of them is still offline, an industry source said, illustrating the severity of the latest blow to the national grid. Now, moving on to the Russian economy, this was kind of mentioned yesterday in the piece by Steve Rosenberg, BBC journalist whose video I played to you. So it's just repeating that, but it kind of gives us a segue into the rest. Chinese banks are tightening controls on payments from India, UAE, and Hong Kong to Russian companies, aiming to avoid secondary sanctions. Enhanced checks now scrutinize shipping documents to identify any Russian trace. This is really good news. Screws tightening on the Russians to stop any payments being made to Russia being made with consummate ease. Now, the ruble is doing even worse. It's now above 103. It was 101. It's really in free fall at the moment, as you can see by this infographic there. Let's hope that continues. That will make inflation really bite in terms of imports, if I get that the right way around. Yes, so it means that things you're buying in, you'll have to spend more ruble. Yeah, yes, exactly. So your imports will be much more expensive. That will lead to inflation on imported goods. That will add to the woes of the Russian consumer in Russia. Okay, Tendar says, 2 charts reflecting Russia's state of the economy. The Russian ruble is clearly, and let's bring that one up and then talk about it. So the Russian ruble is clearly losing value, as mentioned, with accelerating speed. This already happened when the full-scale war started back in 2022. Russia's primary countermeasure was to increase the base interest rate. That worked back then. Almost 3 years later, the situation has dramatically worsened for Russia. Now, despite how high interest rates the ruble is losing value, Russia will have to increase the already high interest rate to even higher levels. This will further strangle the Russian economy, but far worse, it might not have much effect on the falling ruble, which has been way anyway overvalued. This is a bubble which Russia cannot ignore and sustain for long. Putin must look for a pause within the next few months. This is why they needed the stunt yesterday in Dnipro. Despite that being the first time that an ICBM, IRBM being fired at a city, it's not really a new situation. Russia's scare tactics are aimed to cover for the fact that Russia is on the brink of collapsing from the inside. It's not economically the same situation as when the Soviet Union collapsed, but it is politically. Putin is extremely nervous, and he has reason to be. If the war is not stopping soon, or even escalating, the Russian emperor's clothes will be exposed, or lack thereof. The West and Ukraine should immediately intensify all efforts to push Russia over the edge and into the abyss by closing sanction loopholes and targeting Russian oil and gas infrastructure, both economically and using missiles. For those, the TLDR is open fire using all guns, including economic guns. And this is exactly what I've been saying for a long time now, that this war, but particularly recently, this war will be won economically. It's often, I mean, I was saying this because, well, everyone says this. It's a very commonly held position that you win a war if you've got the deepest pockets, because that will allow you to have the deepest industrial pockets and the ability to buy and procure, manufacture weapons to use in a war. And if you've got much deeper pockets than the other side, then that allows you to string out the war for longer and longer until the other side cannot cope. Now, Roman Sheremeta here has his opinion on Russia's economy. He says it's in worse shape than previously reported. The Russian central bank has nearly exhausted its resources. No people left, worsening the labour market, with 73% of enterprises facing labour shortages. Production is at its limits. Factory capacity utilization surpasses 80%, a record high. When an economy reaches the limits of its productive capacity while demand continues to be stimulated, stagflation arises. A credit bubble and isolation. Rising interest rates are driving up credit costs. Commodity industries are losing Western markets, and defense factories are running at full capacity. A slowing GDP growth despite enormous stimulus. GDP growth slowed to 3.1% in Q3, quarter 3, down from 4.1% in quarter 2 and 5.4% in quarter 1, and stagflation. The central bank predicts near stagnation next year, with GDP growth of 0.5 to 1% and a flat investment and private consumption. In other words, this is a real problem for the Russians at the moment and going forward. So we'll keep an eye on a daily basis on the Russian economy. And moving on, in a similar vein, apparently, the Russians are struggling to pay their soldiers. Even Russia's own tightly controlled domestic propaganda machine can no longer hide the cash flow problems in the Russian military. Putin rolls out Medvedev to do damage control. So, this Kommersant newspaper article says Medvedev demanded that problems with payments to SVO participants be resolved, so soldiers. Deputy Chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Medvedev, noted the importance of timely payments and assistance to the participants of the special operation. At the same time, he called for honest approach to the existing problems and stated that they can be solved with state and party powers. Quote, when I come to a region, governors always report to me on how events are developing in this area, what the problems are, and there are problems. There are problems, it appears, in Russia being able to pay its soldiers in a timely fashion. And the last thing I'm going to say, just leading towards disinformation, but also within the way certain articles are being framed. Here's a Daily Telegraph article on America is giving up on NATO, Britain is the new reason why. And it's a comment article. But Shashank Joshi, who I really rate actually, is the defense correspondent of The Economist, saying total misrepresentation of the US-EU security cooperation. Check. 2010s want their talking points back. Quote, negotiations are now underway on a UK-EU defence pact that would lock the UK to foreign policy and intelligence sharing with Brussels. Yes, this will happen because the US is putting or looking to put someone like Tulsi Gabbard in charge, etc., etc. Anyway, the larger point here being, watch out for the way things are being framed in articles, even if it's, our own media. So the Daily Telegraph is interesting because they're often really pro-Ukraine, especially when you have the Ukraine the Latest podcast. But then certain articles will still get through and, free press and all that. But just be wary because certain people will be wanting to get their agenda across. And so there have been some Daily Telegraph articles that have been absolutely woeful concerning Ukraine and others that have been absolutely amazing. Shashank Joshi then goes on to say, you can tell when a column is fundamentally unserious when it describes the watchkeeper drones as critically important. So what I wanted to say is yesterday, and this leads on to my next point. Yesterday, I talked in the military aid video about how the UK is is deciding not to continue funding a bunch of things. 2 amphibious ships, a bunch of helicopters, so on and so forth, and 46 watchkeeper drones that are actually pretty expensive and they're not really fit for purpose. And I talked about how our understanding of what drone needs we have has completely changed. And the Ukrainian war has done that. So no longer do we need these really expensive, big old reconnaissance drones like the Reaper drone. So 46 of those type drones are not needed. And there is some justification for those cuts being made yesterday, or for us saying, yeah, we don't need that. And interestingly, some people are asking, are we going to give Ukraine first dibs on some of this stuff that we're not going to continue funding? And actually, I think that we are. There is talk about that, but we'll come to that later in one of my next videos. But this Daily Telegraph article, Shashank Joshi says you can tell a column is fundamentally unserious when it describes watchkeeper drones as critically important. Critically important ships, helicopters, and drones. These aren't. I mean, the point of them being cut is that they are not critically important, at least for those. Now, when it comes to the amphibious ships, when we don't have the Marines to fill, we have an issue, like many countries do, in recruiting for our armed forces. And it's very difficult to keep sustaining these big ships when you don't have the Marines to fill them. So we need to get the Marines. And the point is that if you are going to be critical of this decision by the UK government, but any government, this pertains to all of the countries out there, we have really difficult decisions of like A, not having enough money, B, wanting to fund Ukraine, and C, wanting to fund our own armed forces. Do we fund our own armed forces more than we fund Ukraine when if Ukraine wins, then we won't need our own armed forces to do X, Y, and Z. So actually, we should be funding Ukraine more. So I think the direction of money at the moment is to Ukraine before our armed forces, but then our armed forces really need the money. So we've got finite resources. How do we spin all these plates and spend money in different places? And there will be decisions that will go down as deeply, deeply unpopular. But the idea is, when we don't have limitless money, this is what we have to do. Anyway, this then leads on to, please continue to watch out for trolls on the threads. Here's an example of what I think is a troll. So I said we're £500 million down. Those cuts are going to save £500 million, right? So where do we get the $500 million? If we want to keep those 46 Watchkeeper drones going and those older helicopters going, then where do we find the $500 million from? So Numpty Bumpty comes on and says, well, £10,000 pay rise to train drivers and £41,000 per illegal immigrant is where I find the $500 million from. I just want to do a little thing. So anytime I see a decimal point in a large, like 5-digit number plus, I know that that's not been written by a British person. So this is a European way of writing things, okay? Or Russian way of writing things. So we use a comma where Europeans use a decimal point. And in the UK, no one ever uses decimal points like that. It is just not ever done. So that is not a British person saying this. As someone got to this person before me, you're trying to sound like you're from the UK, except you're not from the UK, are you? And I say we would never use a decimal point like that. It's European, etc. So just be warned, there are still trolls around there. Numpty Bumpty is clearly a troll in my book, and trying to do the old divisive, we shouldn't be giving train drivers extra money or illegal migrants, and so blah, blah, blah. Typical kind of talking points, but the problem is still the same. We're all facing that. Whatever country we're from, whether it's the US, France, Germany, Finland, UK, Austria, wherever you're from, we've got finite amounts of money. We need to sort out all our own domestic things like education, hospitals, but we also need to recognize the massive threat that Russia is to our national and international security. How do we arrange our budget so that we don't just get voted out the next election because people are like, why are you spending money in Ukraine and not on hospitals? So we need to make sure our communication is adequate from our government. And if our governments are failing to adequately communicate the importance of supporting Ukraine, then we need to end up doing that ourselves. You and I'm doing that with my YouTube channel, but you can do that around a water cooler at work and at the dinner table on Sunday. Whatever. We have our job to do to make sure that we understand. Now, some of these are difficult discussions that don't have a definite answer. Like, I don't know how to best apportion the national budget in the UK. I mean, I do if my only concern is Ukraine. If my only concern is Ukraine, then I'm going to be spending my money this way. But actually, we need to be thinking about all things, and we need to get the optimal. What is the optimal? I don't know that there is a knowable answer to that. Our present government has decided that £500 million is better spent elsewhere, right, than maintaining some older ships and older helicopters and drones that aren't so useful as they were. You can criticize that. Okay, what's the alternatives? A couple of you came on that video and did criticize that, me as being too pro-Labour. Fair enough, okay, but give me the alternative. How would you spend that money? Where would you get that money from? And that's the same as I say for every country. Anyway, thanks for watching, but watch out for those trolls. Take care, speak soon.